There you go. I love it. All right, it looks like we're ready to go live.
Yep. Okay.
And did we lose Bruce? Uh-oh, I think Bruce may have hit the wrong button. Well, I'll kick off, and then Bruce was going to join or come back and help lead. Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome to the OWEB Climate Committee meeting. This is our second meeting in between board meetings. And I think the plan is to look at the resolution, and Bruce was there and popped off the screen again. So I'm hoping he finds his way back quickly. So while Bruce is connecting, maybe we should just go around and introduce ourselves. How does that sound? To keep us moving. I'm Lisa Hanson, Executive Director of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. I'll go to staff first. How's that? And then we'll let Bruce go to the board members. Eric H.
Morning, Eric Hartstein, Board Legislative Policy Coordinator.
Eric Williams.
Good morning, everybody. Eric Williams, Grant Program Manager at OWEB.
Stephanie.
Morning, everybody. Stephanie Page, Deputy Director, OWEB.
Courtney.
Courtney Schaff, Business Operations Manager at OWEB.
Jesse.
Hi, everybody. Jessie Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator.
And Audrey.
Good morning, Audrey Hatch, the Conservation Outcomes Coordinator with OWEB.
And April.
Good morning, Executive Director's Assistant for OWEB.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. We did staff, and so do you want to do board introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I see we have 4 subcommittee members, 2 new, 2 old, 2 long time. I'm sorry, too long time. First off, I really wanted to do a shout out to Lisa and the article in Oregon Live under the climate, addressing climate. Thank you, well written. I told her earlier that anybody who takes, whose last quote in an article about joining OWEB stating that they had won the lottery is okay in my book. And so congratulations, thank you. And I'm sure I speak for the entire climate committee saying that we'll do everything in our power to make you successful as you combat the effects of climate change. So, okay, the second thing is going through notes. I found the notes for our first committee meeting, which was on December of 2019. It was when we were still a subcommittee and maybe ad hoc. And on that, in the discussion summary, it said that board members interested in the topic of climate change convened with staff to discuss how climate change may be elevated at the board level. Board members discussed the following as potential topics. OWEB, and I'm going to go through them real quickly. OWEB strategic plan highlights that improving our watersheds requires taking the long view, and any restoration work completed should take into account a changing future. OWEB is an enabler of conservation work and can be a lead in implementing project level actions to address climate change through nature-based solutions. Climate change is impacting all of OWEB's programs and projects. OWEB can play a leadership role in communicating science to our on-the-ground partners and also reflecting from those partners back to agencies that may be able to provide information to fill identified science gaps in order to implement more effective conservation work. While all OWEB's projects have some tie to climate, we do not have a clear standard on what we are looking for and how to evaluate projects from a climate action perspective. And underserved communities may be most impact. I think we've changed that to our most impact by climate change. OWEB may play a role in promoting environmental justice in this regard. And our ability to downscale predictions of climate impacts to local areas has improved significantly in recent years, and that may help in prioritizing projects that have lasting impacts in the face of climate change. Those were our charges to ourselves. It's been 2 years, and I would like to thank the committee and all the hard work by committee members and staff. It is my opinion that we have made great progress in getting to the charge we set out for ourselves. As the only other committee member who has been through the whole thing, Jamie, maybe you could make a comment on that as well.
Thanks, Bruce. I think that's a really great kickoff to bring us into perspective. I know there's a tremendous sense of urgency. We all feel it. I really appreciate, Lisa, your comments and in hitting the ground running, that you completely recognize this is a huge priority for our state, for the needs of the underlying work that we do, recognize the expertise that we have amongst our team and staff, and really appreciate that everyone has this as a sense of strong priority. I think the charge in front of us is how do we do this? And how do we do it effectively? How do we show that we're doing it in terms of metrics? I think that becomes the conversation we have. But I really appreciate, and to Bruce's remarks, I've always felt a real strong commitment to this being so underlying to the work that we do. So really appreciate that. And then how do we balance that sense of urgency of taking action and measuring the good we do with the tremendous workload that OWEB is facing, and the many different obligations that OWEB and our team feels. And I also just want to really acknowledge that staff have done a phenomenal job of adding this to just an incredible workload. And also, our team has so much pride in the work and does everything they do so well that that incredibly high personal expectation, I just really want to recognize, because there's a level of excellence to what the OWEB team does, and specifically OWEB staff, that I'm just so proud to be associated with it. But as a board member, someone who gets to jump on these meetings, and then staff does all the work in between, and the product has such a high level of excellence. Just really want to recognize the work that goes into that. And so again, I think that's the charge before us, as we're looking at a document and how we describe to the public and to ourselves what that trajectory looks like, what the path is, how we get there. I think that's the conversation we have today, and then of course in the board meeting. And then just lastly to that point, and this is something I thought I'd mention today, is I was reflecting on this, having been in worn a couple of different hats and a couple of different roles myself, is there's the what and the how. And so as policymakers, as board members within the jurisdiction, or I'm not sorry, jurisdiction, between the responsibility and authorities assigned to us as board members, we hold a lot of the what. And I also just really want to recognize the how that is on Lisa, your shoulders and your team's shoulders, of how we get there. And so I think that's also going to be part of the conversation. And then also just really delighted and really appreciate the newer members. You work on your wording there, Bruce, in terms of the longer term, more experienced board members. But for the newer board members stepped up, just been so impressed with not only the insights, the experience, the passion they bring, but also that level-headedness of, yes, we need to do this, absolutely. There's a sense of urgency, absolutely. And we need to get there together and work together as a team. So really appreciate those comments that have come up as well.
So Bruce, you want to have the board members introduce themselves? We went around and did the staff while you were.
Oh, let's do that. So Jamie, do you want to start and we'll go around?
Board member at large and live in Central Oregon.
Kelly?
Good morning, Kelly Coates, tribal representative for the OWEB board.
And Corey?
Hi, Corey Owens with Natural Resources Conservation Service. I'm a federal agency representative on the OWEB board.
And I'm Bruce Buckmaster, member at large from Astoria.
So one point of information as a reminder, this meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and being recorded, so it'll be available later. This is part of our efforts to provide additional inclusion and transparency with our stakeholders. And I would just mention to the board members, we've had really positive feedback in terms of these meetings being public with the committee work that's going on. People are very interested in what we're all talking about and the possible paths forward. And we're going to continue to work to revise the format after we have our full board meeting later this month and talk about some more opportunity. But just as a reminder, we're live and on YouTube now.
Thanks, Lisa. So we're coming up on our January full board meeting. The Climate Committee is on the agenda to present what we decided at our previous two meetings, a resolution to the board for action with the resolution containing our language for what we think the board should use to address OWEB's approach to climate change. We have all received, I think we have all received by email the various drafts and discussions, the latest being a draft 4B, which I think everybody has. And so the question will be called is, what changes, if any, do we want to make before we finalize our recommendation to the full board?
So, Chair Buckmaster, you might want to just speak to a little bit of the version change that came out Friday, and background, or if you want me to touch on that, I can do that as well.
That would be fine. Why don't you go ahead, Lisa?
Okay. So just for background for everybody, at the October board meeting, there was a board climate purpose statement that was discussed. I think there had been a tremendous amount of work done on that. I was not familiar with the purpose statement. What I have seen in boards that I've worked with are resolutions that really set up a strong background set of language and then put forth what the goalposts are to be working toward. So when we had our committee meeting, I think in December, the staff had gone back and taken the climate statement, purpose statement, and revised it into a resolution. I think there were parts and pieces from that discussion that the committee liked and appreciated. There were some things that needed some more work. We, staff, took that feedback and attempted to incorporate it. That would have been the version that was out on the website prior to Friday. But right after the holidays, started reaching out to board members to talk about what was there and get some feedback, knowing that everybody had some distractions, for that last week in December-ish. And what we found after multiple discussions, I think there was a desire to have some more stronger action words, is what I'm going to say, or stronger action statements from what was in the staff version. And so Chair Buckmaster had done quite a bit of work early last week, midweek, I think is when we talked towards the end of the week, putting more action statements back into the resolution. And I think it may have pulled more from the purpose statement previously. Chair Buckmaster and Stephanie and I visited on Thursday late in the day to do some more work because there were still a few places where I continued to have questions about what it meant and how we might think about implementing this. And so ultimately, the chair went back and reworked the resolution again. And so that would be the 4B version that you should have now that we would be working from. And even since then, I think Jesse received some comments from organizations that we met with last week and had conversations with. So she may be able to provide a little more feedback, Chair, around that. But that gives everybody kind of the history in terms of what's happened since our October board meeting to now. And just to say there has been a lot of work and a lot of effort into trying to revise put it into a resolution format. And this will be the first resolution, to my understanding, that the board has had. And so, you know, resolution 1 around a very, very important issue. And so, Bruce, there's the background. And if you want to walk through, you know, some of the resolution, or we could ask Stephanie and Jesse to do that, however you would like to proceed.
Okay. First, I will mention, I just received word that we actually have, there are 23 people watching our YouTube video. So, Jamie, be extremely careful. So, on the draft, I guess the easiest way is to ask board members, have you read the 4B draft? So everybody has read the draft. Are there any questions or suggestions that you would have for the draft as presented on 4B? All right. And
We've
I
got
know
hands up, Bruce, from Jamie, Corey, and Kelly.
Perfect. So, Kelly, do you want to go? You're on the right-hand side of my screen. Do you want to go first?
Certainly. So I read draft 4B and I submitted comments on the previous draft as well. I feel that the language is good, and I don't think that we necessarily have to have any additional edits from my perspective. I'm okay with the change in 4B as well. The one change that I found. I do have a question because I did see that we have public comment on it. I know we received a written public comment, and I reviewed that. So I'm just curious about incorporating those elements in it, because what was on the public comment is definitely something that would be a much larger change to the resolution as it's written. So I'm just wondering, kind of process-wise, how we address that and work that in.
Thanks, Kelly. And while I looked at I didn't see the public comment until just before the meeting started, so I have not had a chance to think much about it. I gave it a cursory look. And I can't pull it up since I'm on here. If somebody can pull up that comment or set of comments and put them out, then maybe we can discuss them. I like your idea, Kelly, but if we can start to do that. Eric.
Thank you.
Has done that. And can we make that a little larger, Eric? So is the change, I can read down to the first 4 lines from I suggest. Okay, now I can read to the last line, many rural communities. Is that the only change that's on the comment? No, okay.
There were several, Chair. So why don't we ask, maybe Jessie is the most familiar because she received these, to just talk through them. I think the first one's in the second whereas. So Jessie, do you want to do that?
Yeah, sure. That's no problem. So I think the two bigger boxes of text, the I suggest, and then there are specific ways. The suggestion is just within the whereas section. If we want to add 1 or 2 places where we're acknowledging the importance of watersheds to agriculture, farming, and ranching as just I think that sort of background or justification for why we're doing this climate resolution. So just reiterating the importance of those aspects of watersheds, because it sounds like that maybe isn't necessarily reflected in the whereas section yet. And then the other piece, it's kind of a similar idea, just acknowledging again that if we, the larger society as a whole, continue to not address climate change and not try to address like reductions of greenhouse gases, that we're going to continue to see significant declines in watershed health, that it's going to impact all of these different things. Things like declines in traditional foods, there'll be declines in fisheries, and there's just going to be a lot of cascading impacts to natural resources and communities. And so it was it's just suggesting if we want to acknowledge that in the whereas section, if we want to add a sentence or 2 that's acknowledging that piece of it. I think those are sort of the 2 biggest pieces. And then the remaining suggestions in there are more specific, sort of nuance along with the text. But since this is from an earlier version, I know there's some of these things have been added actually, and then some it's just if we want to look at it in comparison to 4B, because it's going to be a little bit different since the text changed, particularly in the resolution statement bullet points. Yeah.
So it just came to my attention because we didn't provide an official public comment. This came in an email. We probably need to just use this as a reference point, and then it needs to be in the official public comment during our meeting next week. Eric Hartstein, is that what you were alluding to me?
Yes, we should consider this at the full board meeting.
Okay, so just know that this is out there. I think it's for us to think about. We'll make sure it gets in the full board meeting information. I think with feedback, we'll be talking with the full board about format for committee meetings going forward and public comment, how to include it, maybe in a more elegant way than we did in this first round between meetings, recognizing we needed to make the meetings public. I think there are a couple of questions that I have, but I think Corey has a comment, and so does Jamie, and then maybe I can get some feedback on mine.
Thank you, Lisa. So my comment, I really shout out to all the folks who've worked on the many iterations of this. I know these kind of documents take a long time to think through, and I've been really impressed with the level of attention and detail and just thoughtfulness that's gone in from all aspects of the process. So that's really great. My comment on this is I agree with Kelly. I think this is really close. You could spend another 24 hours and come up with almost the exact same thing, but maybe people like it a little bit better. So at some point you do kind of have to call it. I would say, one of the conversations I had with Jessie is if I was someone in the public reading this, I would want to know a little bit more of the OWEB definition. Like when OWEB writes climate smart, what do they mean? When OWEB writes climate lens, what do they mean? Jesse and I had a lovely conversation about our different interpretations of what resiliency meant and our perspectives on when we hear the word resiliency, what we think about. And she was coming from her adaptation standpoint, and I was coming from my NRCS standpoint. So I don't know the formality through a resolution of how you do that, but if there could be like a definition sheet, or I think that would actually go a long way to help clarifying what the intent is. If you could take some of these terms that are used all the time in climate, and they're the right words, but every agency, every country, every state kind of has their different flavor of them. So, and I don't know if the state has kind of centralized what they think their, flavor is. Like maybe the Oregon Global Warming Condition has defined some of these things that we could just reference or something like that, where as a reader, when I say, okay, rulemaking to include OWEB climate lens, that's awesome. That sounds great. What is a climate lens? That kind of thing. So just nothing that necessarily would need to change how this is written, but maybe for someone who does want to dig a little bit deeper into what this means and how it's going to impact how they work with OWEB, a little bit more context for some of the terms is all I would say.
Jamie?
Yeah, thanks. And really, really appreciate the comments of my colleagues. And first and foremost, talk you through the public comments. So thanks for doing that. That was going to be one of my questions. So always, how are we, how is staff, how is OWEB responding to the questions from the public? That was really helpful. The two things I'll call out, and I heard what you said about this being a discussion, the full board meeting, but perhaps the committee can make a recommendation that is part of the discussion that followed up. And I would suggest that includes that the two proposed adds to the whereases. I think those are really important to message the value of that. So that would be my recommendation that would go forward to the full board and that came from public comment. I thought that was really important. Actually, to start with, this is a great product. So much work has gone into this. It's really phenomenal. And it is really tough to take all these ideas and all this energy and passion, put it into a very workable document. So phenomenal job. And I know it's been hours of work. So thank you. Really want to recognize that. I was also going to make Corey's comment about, the definitions. So whether it's a footnote, however you figure out the best way to do that, you guys will figure that piece out. But I think it is important to help it be a standalone document or a document that people say, oh yeah, I get what that means. It's not just our own internal jargon. I think that's an important point as well. And then the one other kind of guess more substantial point, and it comes, it ties in, it's based in one of the whereases, and it ties in more to the resolution and maybe a separate bullet point. But I noticed that the second bullet under the be it resolved was integrate diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental justice principles when making funding decisions to address economic and ecological damage to traditionally underrepresented impacted communities. I think that's great. So that goes into the decision making. But one of the things I think that is missing is actively engaging the impacted communities in the process and also identifying what needs to happen. So in one of the whereases, and I think it's the fourth whereas,
yeah,
it says the impacts of climate change may disproportionately affect impacted communities such as Native American tribes, communities of color, rural communities, coastal communities, lower income households, and other communities traditionally underrepresented in public processes. I think that's a really important whereas to have in there, and I think it was very well done, so thank you. What this document doesn't then kind of challenge us to do is actively take those communities and what we've sometimes talked about as our non-traditional partners, and often as non-traditional partners because people just haven't had the resources or wherewithal or ability to, through the process we have, to engage in those processes and really influence our decision making. We haven't really opened a door to enable those most impacted to not just apply for and get funding, but really shape our thinking. So that active engagement, I would like to see us incorporate that as well.
So can I ask a question around that? And maybe this will help us sort through it. I think the second be it resolved statement was trying to get at that, and I think it may not yet. because the way it's written right now is we would consider DEI in our evaluation criteria. But I think what you're saying, maybe more importantly, because we're learning more about DEI through the training we're going through, but to find ways to actively engage these communities in our process, would that be a better way to say it? So it is a strong action statement around it.
I think it's both, not either or. So
Okay.
I think what I'm seeing in this, and I think this is what we're getting to, is as we allocate resources, we are incorporating an understanding of these impacts into the allocation such that the impact of the dollars allocated, these public dollars, are addressing what we've identified in the whereas. So that's the allocation piece. But before we get to the allocation piece, we need to really more fully develop our understanding. And so that's the other piece that I think needs to be here. Now, this is challenging because the fact that, you know, there's some of these partnerships that we recognize, we're recognizing the impacts, we're recognizing that there's this gap and this need. How we fill that gap, how we educate ourselves to fill this gap, how we bring in partners and experts, local, regional, subject matter experts that may or may not have letters after their name. I mean, this is not kind of that traditional, it's a broader definition of expertise, and that's really important. Sometimes it's a lived experience is alone its expertise, that we incorporate that into our understanding of what shapes how we understand the impacts. Maybe it ties into metrics. So I'm recognizing a gap. I don't necessarily have a solution, but I think it's fleshing out that understanding, having it shape our thinking about how we allocate resources, and then it's also the resource allocation piece.
Yeah, Jamie, this is Bruce. Do you think, first off, I'll say that we, in the last iteration, we did take out the word consider, and actually on the resolution, the be it resolved part, the one that's in front of everybody says integrate. The original word for that was apply the principles. I was okay with changing apply to integrate. I liked apply better, but I was okay with integrate. Are you suggesting we make a change in the whereas or on the integrate?
It's on the resolve piece. I think the whereas importantly identifies a gap. Right. And then it's, let's say I am embodying that whereas as a community. What I would say back to OWEB is, how can you integrate or apply when you don't even understand? That's the piece we're missing. So we first have to understand, and then we have to integrate, and whether it's, integrate, it needs to be a strong enough word to say we're going to do it.
So Bruce, might I suggest that we look at the it is further resolved section, because the it is further resolved section are really direct action pieces, and maybe it's we need to add something actively engage. We need to define that traditional and underserved communities into the understanding and I don't know if it's funding and investing something, whatever what is the what, Jamie? I need to know what the what is, but I think it's actively engage with those communities in something. Is that what you're trying to get to?
That's correct. And I think we can pull the exact language. So we've defined disproportionately affected, impacted communities in the whereas section. So we can even pull that specific language because it reflects back directly to that section. So that's the definition piece of it. So yeah, so it now goes from 2 bullet points to 3 after, and maybe it's actually the first one, but bullet point, but then is to actively engage the communities that we're identifying in this very document as being the most impacted. and actively engaging them into helping us craft meaningful solutions to the problems we're identifying. And then it's identifying some of the integration of into our processes, and then also integrate, or I need to think a little bit. I think integrate is a strong enough word, into our actual, so it's integrate in our processes, and then also integrate into actually how the money is spent. Because it's a nice thing if you're chatting about it and thinking about it, but we're ultimately talking about investing in solutions. And if we've identified communities who are most impacted, they're not part of they're not actively engaged in creating solutions, and they're not invested in to help communities as a whole, and those organizations who partner with communities are not invested in, then there's not going to be the end goal impact.
Okay. So to help us move along, how about this suggestion? We'll take this conversation. We will add under the be it further resolved, actively engage with the appropriate language from above, and something about some action with them for helping us craft meaningful solutions that integrated into funding decisions. I'm sure that Jesse and Stephanie will come up with something much more eloquent than that, but that's, I think, what I heard you say.
Lisa, there is a phrase that's used on this aspect of climate work that we might, I'll ask Jamie what she thinks of it. It's often called locally led adaptation. That seems to be a term of art in climate work, and when they're talking about underserved communities, you would go in and look for locally led adaptation. So if you think that's a good phrase, it's understood by a lot of the climate people.
It can be, but locally led often suggests it's someone who already is in a position of power. And part of what strikes me when I'm looking at that is we're talking about disempowered communities. And so I think I have concerns about that language, okay, given that it may be more, with all due respect, checking a box rather than really getting to what we're identifying as being a huge problem.
That makes sense to me, Jamie. Thanks.
So I will ask staff, Stephanie, Jesse, do you have a good feel for that and feel like we can craft something to address it in an active statement? Okay. We'll take a stab at it.
Perfect. So, other aspects of the version 4B?
So I have a question, and this goes back to the second be it resolved around DEI. The word integrate is highlighted in yellow right now, and trying to figure out, is the word integrate the right word? Because when we talk about integrating criteria above in bullet action 1, that requires rulemaking. So are we looking at there's rulemaking around DEI, or are we getting at it through that actively engaging piece? But I'm looking, I want to understand more about what you want and the how.
Is that an open question, Lisa?
Yeah, yes, I'm trying to get that one right, because it causes me a little bit of nervousness in the way it's written right now, being very transparent, not having been through our new round of DEI training. I'm not sure, I don't have a good sense yet for myself what it would look like in rulemaking. I understand actively engaged. and finding different ways to engage and mechanisms to pull people in. That makes sense to me. But just so we don't fall short of what people might be thinking integrate means.
So I first want to confirm that we're talking about two separate actions. We're not trying to combine them, right? Okay. So
I think so.
I think unless someone has a brilliant insight on this, I don't. Part of what, in my mind, we want that integrate word that you've got highlighted to say is, when we learn what we do not yet know, we will apply it. We commit to applying it to our processes. And maybe even using DEI is, that leaves some gaps, because as we've been, been told before, and in kind of in our growing understanding language, we're talking about engagement of tribal communities. And I defer, Kelly, if you want to please provide better insights or better language around this, that DEI does not, that's one piece of it, that's not everything. And so I think that this second bullet you're talking about, Lisa, this integrating DEI and environmental justice principles, we want that to be, in my mind, part of the learning we get out of this active engagement, and part of the ongoing work that that staff is doing to better understand how we can have a positive impact. We will integrate all that learning into how we allocate our resources. That's what, in my mind, we're trying to say there. So going back to your question of whether integrate's the right word, I think the word has just got to cue us that when we get that learning in education, that we commit to applying it so it actually has an impact in the determination of how dollars are spent.
So Kelly has her hand up, and maybe she has a great idea to help us navigate this one.
Maybe not. So I think, so in looking at it, it's funny because integrate struck me as well. And I was trying to figure out what might be better in there. But I think, and this is something that I was thinking in my head just as Jamie was saying it, and maybe this is how we had it before, I can't remember the previous versions, but really what we're trying to do is learn and apply. So can we say apply instead of integrate? Because we're going to apply the principles that we're learning. So it's a bit more of an action word, and it's really saying that we're going to take what we learn about these things and we're going to use it. So it seems stronger in my mind. I'm open to suggestion on that, but that was just kind of my first thought out the gate.
Bruce, you're on mute, but it looks like you have something to add.
Yeah, that was, Kelly, that was the original word that we had in that particular draft, was apply. And just to add a little background, there have been a number of discussions throughout the process that have referred back to various documents, informative documents for where we are today. And one of those is Governor Brown's Executive Order 2004. And in that, she directed the agencies to prioritize actions that will help vulnerable populations and impacted communities adapt to climate change impacts. So why the committee didn't try and copy all the language from either the OGWC or the EO, we were very conscious of not using language that either diverged from the intent of those documents or weakened them considerably. So that was why apply was in there first, because it seemed to be analogous to prioritize.
So can I ask staff a question? How would you, and all of you, how would you feel about learn and apply? Because we are on you know, a path of learning, and we're committing to that. And then, and apply would be once we get our arms around some of it or start to, then applying it to how we do our work. How do people feel about that? I got a couple thumbs up. Jamie, Bruce. Oh, Eric has a question. Williams.
Thanks, Lisa. Actually, not a question. I think that's a good idea. And I think what it does is it actually provides guidance that goes beyond if we're authorized to do an initial round of rulemaking on climate. We'll do what we can, what we know in that first time. But this would imply that we're going to be continually looking at it and adaptively managing through rulemaking, future rulemakings, as we learn more. So I think that's a really nice way to do it.
This is Bruce. My only concern about learn and apply is that a year down the road, somebody could ask the question, why haven't you applied anything? And the answer, an honest answer could be, because we're still learning. And I don't think that is the intent that Kelly had, and certainly not the intent that I heard from Jamie. So how do we address the issue of timing, of action as applied to the time required to learn? I mean, there were comments, well, let's not do anything on DEI until we've had all of our training and that sort of thing. And that, so that's my concern. And
so Jamie, do you want to respond? And then I have a thought.
Yeah. So Bruce, I appreciate that urgency that we need to be moving forward. But what I really heard from Eric's comments is that we don't wait to apply it. We apply it as we learn. So that kind of growing and learning organization. And I think also what I really appreciated from his comments, and this is again something I've seen our team do anyway, is continue to grow and learn and apply as we grow, learn and apply. So I didn't hear it as an either or. I heard it as a apply to the process, you know, in this, you know, as we go, but also in this next year, but that we don't stop learning after we go through this initial process. So that's kind of what I heard from Eric's comments, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. The other thing though that did bring to mind is, you know, rulemaking is a very formal process and it's a very established process. And if we've identified in this document that there are gaps to people having access to the process, and we could spend put a laundry list of them in place. Are we also engaging some of the folks who, you know, how are we also engaging folks in the rulemaking process so that we're not running counter to this whole idea of engaging non-traditional communities? So that's one thing that came up for me in that comment. But otherwise, to your concern, Bruce, I think what I heard Eric say actually does not run counter to your, you know, this ongoing learning.
Kelly, you have a comment?
Yes, I think we're all really close here. And for me, it's something that Bruce said and that I've heard Jamie and Eric say, is that adaptation piece, that it kind of gets to that adaptive management piece of things, that we, you know, we adaptively manage as we learn things, right? Which we're constantly doing in natural resources. So it's based on the best available science and the adaptive management of it. And I think here it applies as well, because we would be adapting as we learn more and applying it as we go. So it kind of ties back into that. And I don't know if that's helpful language to put in here or not, but that I think that's kind of what we're all talking about.
Okay, so we could think about having it more continuous improvement language. So learn, apply, adapt, because that's that circle part of it. But we also have below in the be it resolved action statement, actively engage, which I see completely plays directly off of that second be it resolved bullet with an immediate action in terms of bringing more people in and being more inclusive and trying to identify those people that may not have had an easy path into our process, our grants, our decision making, etc. If that helps, I mean, I'm trying to think about how each of them tie together into something as we take the whereases to the big be it resolves, which we have two plus, and then some more active actions below in the further be it resolves.
Lisa, this is Bruce. I'm fine with that. You know, I have a great deal of faith in the board members and the staff of OWEB to apply this as intended and commit to this wholeheartedly. And of course, we have being a transparent agency, we have the public watching us, and if they feel we're getting off track or not doing enough, I'm sure we'll hear about it. So if everybody is comfortable with that, moving towards that language, I concur. Now, I think it was Corey, did you say you needed to leave at 10? So maybe we should cover anything that you need to make sure that we have you, everything you want to address.
I am happy with everything that's been said, and I'm nothing from here.
So Bruce, before Corey leaves, one of the things that after, I think you had visited with Stephanie and I Thursday, and Stephanie had done some further thinking on was the climate lens piece. And I think this may help to address that language commonality. Steph, do you want to talk about what you were thinking about and brought back to me Friday that I thought was best brought here before making any adjustments?
Yes, a couple of the earlier versions I think had mentioned climate criteria in that first bullet, which criteria is typically what we're considering when we're evaluating grant applications. And so we had thought it might be helpful to add climate criteria back to that first bullet in addition to climate lens, just because that term is clear to us and I suspect to the staff and our grantees.
Yeah. And Bruce had it there in one of the versions he sent to us. And we, staff, were like, but it was somewhat redundant to us, and so we went one way. But I think maybe it's better that we're redundant, so there's more clarity for more people. And so I take it my comment back, Bruce, from when we were trying to simplify things.
I know I feel like a pinball sometimes, Lisa. But anyway, I'm okay with the both of the pieces. For Kelly and Corey, the committee did work a great deal on a climate lens definition, and it's very short. And it said, it was in our first report, climate lens is a project ranking tool designed to determine the relative value of proposals according to how they meet OWEB's established standards of climate action. OWEB climate standards generally follow IUC and global standards, but these may be modified to incorporate specific criteria determined to best fulfill the OWEB mission. That was to not lock us in to the IUCN, but to give us a bit of a framework and to say that we would have the opportunity to modify and adjust for OWEB's particular needs as we move forward. But defining what the climate lens is was work that was done. And when if that question comes up at the full board meeting, I'll have this and be prepared to read it.
I think some of the expansion on the IUC definitions were places where myself and staff got a little bit hung up in terms of we weren't as familiar necessarily with that, but what we do understand is criteria, because that's what we said in rule to evaluate grants and processes. Yeah, Jamie has her hand up.
Yeah, I actually put it in the comments, but realized that people can't necessarily see the comments. So just wanted to say, really, Stephanie, really appreciate that ad. That actually been in my notes, but I had not included it specific to rulemaking. Whether I usually call it metrics, but that criteria, getting it specifically in there, I think is a really important ad. So thank you.
So with the changes that have already been directed, approved by the committee members, I think, should I understand that we are pretty much in a position to have a finalized resolution, or our finalized resolution, to go before the full board?
Sorry, just one other thing. Our whole discussion around that adaptation and continual learning, I think it's really important to have it be in the resolve section. But was there a separate thought, since we've got under it is further resolved as a series of bullet points? That's kind of the, yeah, and also this stuff too, we're going to keep forefront. Should we add a bullet point under there that fully fleshes that out? So I'll just throw that back. If, Lisa, if you and your team, when you look at how it ends up under the resolution piece, if essentially Eric's comment about that, learning organization, continued adaptation, if it looks like there's not, it's not fully addressed in one place, you want to add it to another, I would just welcome that. But I'll leave it to you guys in terms of the final language and what makes sense.
Jamie, we talked about the fact that we didn't want a resolution to be so prescriptive that it eliminated the very thing you're talking about. So actually adding, I concur with adding a bullet point on the further resolution, be it further resolved.
So Stephanie, Jesse, I hear that as, kind of a continuous improvement statement, right? What is it? Do, check, what, it's the circle with the arrows. I can't think of all four places in it, but that's okay.
Hi, Brenda.
Hi there. Sorry I'm late.
So can anybody, Lisa, you're good at this. Can you recap for Brenda what we've done?
Sure. So I think generally we're pretty comfortable with whereas statements, Brenda. That's kind of what I heard from the committee. We've had some discussion around in the first be it resolved section, the second bullet that talked about DEI. And so we are going to modify that language to something that talks about continuous improvement, learn, apply, and adapt principles of DEI in our process. So as we learn more, we may want to modify what we're doing going forward. We talked about trying to make sure where there are some common words that are used in the climate world, making sure that we all understand the definition. So one word was resilience. We need to think about how that's used and if there's any more explanation around it. Climate lens, we're going to go back to adding climate criteria beyond that. So it's a longer statement again, because climate criteria to us as staff makes sense because it's part of our granting process. and what we used to evaluate. So that was helpful. We also talked about adding an additional, be it further resolved statement that talked about active engagement with underserved communities to help us find meaningful solutions and integrate those into our funding decisions. So there's something really actionable around reaching out to underserved people, which I think ties into the whereas it and the whereases, and then first be it resolves. And then looking at adding one more, be it further resolved, that ties us to a continuous improvement statement. That we're just because we've done this now, we need to continue to think about it and improve upon it as we learn more in this realm in terms of adaptation, mitigation, etc.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. This is really helpful and sounds great.
Thanks, Lisa. Brenda, did you have anything that you would like to comment upon the version 4B as written and modified by what Lisa just explained?
No, nothing specific, Bruce. I really do appreciate the be it resolved section being more clear, decisive, more of a commitment on the part of the agency. So that was great. I really like the addition of the underserved community support piece that was discussed. So, and it sounded like there was probably a somewhat of a better explanation of the climate lens. Is that correct? Did I get that? Yeah. So those were some of the things that I looked for, and no, I think it looks really good. Thank you, Lisa and Bruce and the whole group for improving this.
Thanks, Brenda. I know Corey had to leave us. I did want to mention to anybody who has come into the process later on, most of the phrasing words are used have reference back, as I mentioned, to the Executive Order, Global Warming Commission. Corey had mentioned she had questioned what climate smart, how it would apply, and that is clearly that was unashamedly grabbed from the Oregon Global Warming Commission report, and I'm sure Jesse can fill in the blanks on that one. So hopefully there may be unfamiliarity with phrasing for people just looking at a resolution, but there are easy and readily accessible explanations for how it got in there and what it means.
Bruce, is there general agreement among staff and the climate committee that this current version is supported by all, or are there still minority views?
We heard changes. Well, I will say we heard some changes from board members. There's some suggestions, and I think most of those were either resolved or incorporated. So Kelly nods her head, Jamie nods her head, Corey did before she got off. So those were those are the board members or the committee members that are on. So Lisa, I guess you can speak for staff.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I appreciate the process that we've gone through to try and get our hands around the goalposts. I think there's still devil in the detail in terms of the how we get there. And I hear and have heard concern from our grantees and partners around what we do, how we do it, and not making our process overly burdensome because we already have a very, very rigorous grant application. And so for me, as we work forward, one of the things when I came into this position, I wanted to make sure that we were making our funding and our process available to underserved communities who tend to have less resources. And so given that, not creating additional complexities that make it hard for them to participate with us. So that's, as we've added the climate criteria, that really has been in the back of my mind for the board members and trying to think about how we do it. So like I said, devil will be in the details. I think we're going to need a lot of help thinking about the how. So that people can still access and more people have access should they want to participate in these programs.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I think that's understandable. I think one of the bullets under it is further resolved does address that, and that is that there will be additional support for people to technical support and guidance so that they can be more successful. So, I really hope that staff sees this as an important challenge to move forward and take on. And if the board can help, then that's great.
So a couple of things on an additional technical support. I think we need to think about how that might happen. Would that be services that are contracted from somewhere to help put things together, because we're a grantor. And so what is the right role of OWEB and OWEB staff in terms of providing technical support versus what other resources should we be reaching out to funding? So I think there are discussions there, and some of the traditional roles of what we have provided technical assistance with, or who we've looked to provide that technical assistance, that we need to have additional conversations around, Brenda.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. I think though, climate change is a non-traditional challenge, right? So we need to come up with non-traditional approaches to solving it.
Yeah, and that's fair. But if we're going to look to OWEB staff to do it, we're going to have to talk about either more staff or what we're not going to do. Because we've hit a spot and, have had a couple new assignments come in that are really, really stretching us in terms of what we have, even within the management team to balance it out. So those are the things I'm going to continue to ask all of you as we think about how we navigate through this so that we can help people be successful.
Yeah, I'm curious, would there be an opportunity for cross-agency collaboration on providing contract support for this sort of thing? I mean, I hear the same sorts of concerns from some of the discussions on the Board of Forestry that, the small private landowners don't have the capacity or the ability to try to figure out what to do here. So I think there's probably some commonalities, and I expect that you might hear the same thing. You would know better than I from the ag community or others.
Yeah, you would. You are spot on with that, and those are the things we're going to have to get creative about and figure out how we're going to commit to helping.
Yeah, thank you. And again, my apologies for being late. I had a pre-standing meeting with a graduate student that I couldn't break.
Thanks, Brenda. Through our committee meetings, we've looked at a lot of different tools and options that may be out there, and many of them, things like valuing carbon, looking at somebody like the carbon trust to put on values that we might have to think differently about how carbon values affect projects, and go back to Eric Williams and talk about, okay, how do we look at that as OWEB as a funding agency? And Lisa, Stephanie, and I talked about this at length. We are a funding agency, so that may be one of the major benefits we can add to solving this issue, or making headway on the issue, is funding some of the tools that may become necessary for our project partners. So I think there are a lot of challenges ahead, Lisa, and I also think that the need for staff, I can't help but think, when we had a fire, major fires in Oregon, OWEB stepped up and came up with $7 million, staff to apply that things. We reacted to this major issue in Oregon. The fact that many of us, if not all of us, feel that when we look at climate change, it's just a slow burning fire that requires the same sense of urgency that we had before. So I've got a great deal of faith in the staff of OWEB, and in yours and Stephanie's leadership, and the board's commitment. So hopefully we can move forward at the January meeting and have our first resolution.
So the only other thing I would add, and I want this sort of out there for the board members to be thinking about, one of the things I think that helped Stephanie and I in our conversation with Bruce on Thursday evening, we had the word measurable in the resolution for some time, and I think Bruce was willing to modify that to meaningful, because measurable, I was stuck on quantitative. And again, my concern being grantees and applicants not having tools or expertise in terms of being able to answer some of the questions in a quantitative way. And so our discussion was, it could be qualitative responses around some of the climate criteria potentially. But I want to just punt this out there into this forum with all of you to make sure that we're all thinking about it in a similar way, that meaningful can be qualitative as well as quantitative as we're working with applicants through the process.
Yeah, I appreciate that. At the risk of sounding like a jerk, I'll apologize ahead of time. But measurable can be qualitative or quantitative. So I'm fine with the change, but meaningful is in the eye of the beholder, and so the interpretation of that is qualitative inherently. Measurable can be either quantitative or qualitative.
I think from my perspective, thank you for that, Brenda. I want to make sure that we keep it open to the qualitative piece as well, just for those situations where it's very, very difficult to quantify. And so that really has been the attempt of trying to get that understood by all of us and everybody on the same page.
Just to jump in on that point. Earlier, we were talking about definitions, and so this may tie into the definition piece and just how, and we can call it whatever we want as long as we identify as such. I both agree with you, Lisa, in having both of those. I mean, the bottom line is, are we having a positive impact? The one thing I will flag, and this is kind of a TEI issue, is often when, just to make sure we're not, often when it's qualitative, it opens the door for more bias. And part of our DEI work is to identify our own internalized bias and the bias in our processes, because that's been closing people out of the process. So whatever the magic word is, whatever we have to make sure we're that's addressed. And I appreciate you mentioning that, because I've been talking a lot about metrics, because I think of having to be measurable, but the challenge that takes us back to is, well, who's got that baseline data, and how do we, and if we're not there yet, then how do we get people there? The other thing, and this ties a little bit into the how piece, and again, recognizing this is something for staff's purview, but I appreciated Brenda mentioning the cross-agency support, because I know with like the governor had a 100-year water plan, that our water vision, that really got us all thinking about that and got agencies focused on how do we work together to get there. Bruce touched on this. I think across the state, agencies and organizations and individuals are very focused on climate, whatever you call it. We're calling it different things, but we also seem to need an overall, how are we working to get there? And I know the governor started that with her executive order, but that may be some of those opportunities between agencies to talk about, okay, who do we all agree we need these things to get there, and then who takes on what? And then maybe that's also a conversation back to the legislature that, hey, we need these resources targeted wherever they go, so we can establish fill in those gaps. But just a thought, I mean, Brenda being at OSU's already got the extension service in place, and that already is something in the field that can allow, if people need local expertise, that may be a distribution system of expertise that's already in place. So, but just really appreciate that reference to cross-agency support. I think that's work. And I know, Lisa, you and your team and agencies across state are doing this work. I just, that seems to be, opportunities to mine going forward.
So, Brenda, is there language that you're suggesting would modify meaningful?
Yeah, Bruce, I don't want to derail this. I mean, you all have made a lot of progress on this, getting it to this point. So, if you want to keep it as meaningful, then that's fine. I think the devil is in the details in terms of how that's interpreted when this is implemented. From my standpoint, I'm going to be looking for both quantitative and qualitative aspects of that. And it sounds like Jamie's going to be looking for some metrics, and I expect you will too, Bruce. So, and I know staff will. So, again, I'm okay with it. Yeah, I'm fine.
I think we're going to, I predict that we will start to see projects come before OWEB for funding, coming from people, watershed councils, members of the Oregon Climate Action Plan, or I don't remember the exact acronym, but some existing and some new partners that are going to be pushing us with their information on climate, on the work they want to do with climate within the scope of their projects. And we'll be offering up how they are measuring that as an incentive for us to approve their funding. So I think we are hopefully taking the lead on getting the agency where we feel it needs to be on climate, but I think we're going to find ourselves pushed by a number of great organizations that are absolutely committed to doing climate work in Oregon within the scope of what OWEB is traditionally funded, and I'm excited about seeing those projects.
So thank you. I appreciate that. The one thing I find myself saying a lot is just remember our main source of funding, our core source of funding is Measure 76 dollars. And so we have to make sure we have that watershed habitat connection with those. But I also think that there could be there's additional opportunities coming with federal infrastructure money and other things that may not, the funding may not be at OWEB, but maybe we're part of the connector to that and where it goes with some of these good projects and good ideas. And so we're just going to have to really work at those collaborative efforts over time. What I think in my mind the resolution does, you have put goalposts in place to say OWEB, staff, agency, we need to be striving to get to these things. Now, how are we going to get there? And the staff will be working on more ways, and we'll figure out how we report back those activities to the board as we move along.
Thanks, Lisa. You do bring up Measure 76, and because of that, I've been studying Measure 76 carefully, and having read it a number of times and highlighted different things, certainly this resolution and our opportunity to fund projects that have climate criteria and prioritization. Generally speaking, I would say I don't see anything in Measure 76 that would present us any problems when we talk about protecting, restore, maintain ecological health, when we talk about remedy the condition that limit the health of fish and wildlife. These are all out of Measure 76 in the greatest need of conservation. So incorporating climate action, how we do it to make sure, and we've got Eric there to make sure we do it correctly, but I see Measure 76 as being a particular hoop that we may need to jump through, but a very wide hoop when it talks about climate change.
Eric Williams, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Lisa. I just wanted to follow up on Bruce's comments and your comments, Lisa. I think when we talk about these issues, we tend to focus on restoration and acquisition projects. And this is kind of in the context of our earlier discussion, where is there a statewide interagency possibility for coordinating some of these things, which there clearly is. I think we also should keep in mind that we have 3 regular grant types: technical assistance, stakeholder engagement, and monitoring, all of which are designed to support development of those restoration and acquisition projects, and can be used, I think, to a pretty effective extent to address some of these things that right now we're sort of thinking about as a little bit of an unknown. How do you reach underserved communities with respect to some of these climate initiatives? How do you develop tools? Bruce just mentioned there's going to be people coming to us with ideas on how to develop tools that can be used at the local and watershed level. And those grant offerings, I think, are well positioned to provide funding for a lot of those efforts from our local grantees and the local partnerships we're supporting. So just wanted to mention that as something I think staff are thinking about in terms of, once we get through this rulemaking effort, how do we capitalize on what we already have in place in terms of grant making infrastructure to further some of these things that are embodied in the resolution.
Thanks for that addition, Eric. I appreciate it. Okay, Bruce, I think we're coming up on our hour and a half. Do you have anything you want to say to close the meeting? I feel like we've made a lot of progress over this interim space between my first meeting and my second meeting, and learning to navigate the committee process.
I would only ask that the edits that staff makes could come out quickly enough that if there are any comments by committee members prior to the board meeting, that we have a chance to come out, get back. And Lisa, thank you for reaching out to committee members on these issues. I mean, that makes it a great deal easier. You get a sense of what committee members are thinking, and then we get a chance to talk about I think it makes our meetings much more productive by having that understanding coming into the meeting. So with that, thank you all for the 2 years of hard work to get to this point, and hopefully you all will speak eloquently in support of this resolution when it comes before the full board, because I get tongue-tied. So thank you.
And so I'm going to do a quick check just so you guys have boundaries from us. Jesse, Stephanie, do you think we can have edits out by close of business Friday? That's gives us, a week in between that time and the official board meeting. I got from Stephanie, works for her. Jesse, you feel good about that in terms of enough time? Okay. So members, you can expect a rework with the changes we've talked to by close of business on Friday. And we'll try and get it there if we can.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Great job.
Thank you.